Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Global Governance and Diplomacy Forum. My name is Hae-young Yun. I am the Assistant Dean of External Relations at the KDI School of Public Policy and Management. So it's a great pleasure and honor to have everyone here with us this morning. So KDI School traditionally has held an annual lecture for the diplomatic community in Korea. And in 2022, we decided to change the format a little bit and to offer up an opportunity to actually hear from you. And that has worked so well that we kept it. And this year, we actually joined the two different formats. So we're very lucky to have presentations from our distinguished speakers this morning, which will also be followed by a discussion and a panel. So you'll also have an opportunity to ask any questions if you'd like to. So again, we deeply appreciate your time and expertise that will be shared here this morning. We know that for the diplomatic community, you're being invited to many, many different things. So we're truly honored for you to join us this morning. Just to let you know, this morning's program is being recorded and will be available to watch on KDI School's YouTube channel later today. So to begin, it's an honor to invite our Dean Jun-kyung Kim of KDI School, who will deliver his welcoming remarks. Dr. Kim was Secretary to the President for Financial Policy in 2008 and also served as the President of KDI from 2013 to 2017. So please, if everyone could welcome Dean Kim.
Your Excellencies, distinguished members of the diplomatic corps, esteemed faculty members, students, and honored guests, good morning. It is my great pleasure and honor to welcome you to the 4th Annual Global Governance and Diplomacy Forum. We are deeply grateful for your presence, which underscores the importance of dialogue and cooperations at a time when global challenges are growing in complexity, interdependence, and unpredictability. This year's forum holds particular significance as the international community looks ahead to the 2025 G20 summit in Johannesburg, the first in history to be held in Africa. Under the theme, solidarity, equality, and sustainability, South Africa is placing inclusive and resilient development at the center of a global agenda. We are especially privileged to have Her Excellency, Ambassador Cindy Mukuku, with us to present this vision on that advances disaster resilience, debt sustainability, just energy transition, and fair development of critical minerals. These priorities strongly connect with, in my thought, Korea's own experience of rebuilding the nation in the past. Only a few decades ago, the mountains of Korea were nearly bare. No trees in the mountain. By the end of the 1950s, more than half of Korea's mountains were treeless. Forests had been stripped by poverty and war, illegal lumbering, and tens of thousands of farming families survived by burning the forest land to grow crops. But through bold national policy and grassroots action, that story changed. In the 1960s and 1970s, the Korean government undertook a national effort to resettle 300,000 slash and burn farming households, creating the new homes, new income opportunities, and new avenues for stability. At the same time, more importantly, the villagers organized through 살림계. 살림계 in Korean, that is a traditional village forest cooperatives, co-op, to protect, plant, and jointly manage forest. These cooperative efforts not only restored our green landscapes, but also lifted communities and rebuilt trust between people and public institutions. Now, today, Korea's forests play an essential role in carbon absorption and climate mitigation, offering lessons for countries facing deforestation and environmental fragility. As the global community advances frameworks such as, REDD+, RED+, reducing emissions from deforestation and forest degradation, our experience demonstrates that forest restoration is not only a matter of environmental urgency, but also a path toward sustainable livelihoods, inclusive governance, and long-term resilience. To mark this legacy, my school, the KDI School, recently produced 2 short documentary films and case study. The first film, The Fire That Ended, tells the story of Korea's slash and burn resettlement program, how a nation ended a practice that no other country had fully overcome. The second film, called The Forest We Built Together, traces how ordinary villagers across Korea, through 살림계, village forest cooperatives, helped turn bare hills into forests of hope. These stories are part of Korea's reforestation records, which were officially recognized, inscribed this April 2025 into UNESCO Memory of the World Register, affirming their enduring global relevance. We are proud to share these materials with you today, not as a blueprint, but as a contribution to a global conversation about inclusive, sustainable development. I warmly invite you to view the videos, 2 videos, and explore the accompanying, attaching the case studies, capstone type case study, which are available to all participants on the KDI School YouTube channel. The spirit behind these achievements is closely aligned with the African philosophy of Ubuntu. I am because we are. Korea's development journey affirms this enduring truth: solidarity enables progress, equality gives that progress purpose, sustainability ensures the legacy. These principles form a natural bridge between Korea's past and South Africa's G20 leadership today. They are also highly relevant to the global economic environment we are now facing. Our second keynote speaker, Associate Dean Won-hyuk Lim, will address the evolving landscape of international trade, a landscape reshaped by strategic rivalry among the major powers, heightened concerns over economic security and disruptions to global supply chain. The weakening of multilateral dispute settlement mechanisms, the rise of a tariff reciprocity as a strategic instrument, and the reconfiguration of global value chains all point to a more uncertain era. In such a context, the world must work with greater resolve to build trust, diversify partnerships, and reinforce a fair and rules-based economic order. Sustainable globalization requires not only open markets, but systems that are resilient, transparent, and anchored in mutual respect. It is in this spirit that Africa's growing economic role deserves particular attention. With the emergence of the African Continental Free Trade Area, a single market of 1.4 billion people is taking shape, rich in resources, demographic dynamism, and entrepreneurial energy. Korea sees Africa not through a narrow lens, but with respect as a partner of a shared potential where cooperation can deepen in technology, education, and green development and cultural exchange. As we commence today's discussions, allow me to express again my profound appreciation to all ambassadors, scholars, and participants for joining us. Your engagement strengthens the global community that the KDI School is dedicated to cultivating. Let us use today's forum to reaffirm our collective commitment to global solidarity, to fair and inclusive growth, and to a sustainable and resilient international order, guided always by the enduring wisdom of Ubuntu. I am because we are. Thank you, and I wish you all a productive and inspiring forum. 감사합니다.
Thank you very much, Dean Kim. And I think our audience will definitely benefit from the 2 short documentary films that he mentioned. We will send you the YouTube links so it's easier for you to find. Okay, and with that, ladies and gentlemen, we will now begin the first presentation. I'm delighted to introduce Ambassador Cindy Mukuku from the Embassy of the Republic of South Africa. Before her appointment to Seoul, she served as the Chief Director for Central, South, and Southeast Asia at South Africa's Department of International Relations and Cooperation, where she oversaw the country's engagement with 24 nations across the region. And today, she's here to speak on inclusive and resilient growth. So if everyone would also please give her a warm welcome of applause, Ambassador Mukuku.
Good morning. I will try. I don't have the best voice today, but I will try because it is always good to talk about your country. I think all of us diplomats here, we always get excited when we have to talk about our countries. So, good morning to the KDI School. Thank you for the invitation. And I also greet my colleagues, and I greet the students and all the distinguished participants in this morning's seminar. Thank you. I've just decided to give an overview of the things that I will be focusing on this morning. Of course, our G20 presidency and what it means for us and what the G20 had agreed, because yes, we wanted to have this theme for the G20, but with the support of the G20 members, they also agreed that we can have. They gave a thumbs up to the agenda that we set. We're focusing today on what inclusive and resilient growth means for South Africa and how we have journeyed to make sure that we achieve that. And we continue that, and we want to put emphasis as part of our G20 presidency, the compact with Africa and what it means to the rest of the continent. So having said that, I know that what I was given as a brief was that this is a series of engagements with the diplomatic corps in Korea. It is always not easy to sit with educated people, the scholars and all those, but we always try to make sure that we achieve the purpose and we are aligned to what it means for the seminars. So we are using, as South Africa, the G20 presidency so that we make our contribution to the global conversations and policy formulation. And that is why we decided that some of the priorities that we are going to focus on. Just a second. Please bear with me. I will take these sips more often than not. I wanted to make sure that we share these goals: strengthening disaster resilience, debt sustainability, mobilizing finance and the just energy transition. Mobilizing finance is not only for JET, but also for the growth of the continent. And as the Dean had outlined, that we're a continent that is a big market, that is through the AfCFTA. We are a strong market of more than 1.4 billion people, and we have a youth dividend. And also, we are the next growth point, but I always make this point that when Europe was rising, Asia was the next growth point, and Asia was preparing for that. So let's challenge ourselves as Africa that we must not remain the next growth point, but we must ready ourselves to be that growth point. And when the shifts happen, we are not found wanting, we are found ready to take the charge. So it is a challenge in Africa. So the AfCFTA is part of building that to make sure that we are one big market, but we also challenge potential investors to say the minerals that we're rich in must be developed in Africa. There must be processing, because if we continue selling the raw materials, we're selling the jobs that we need in Africa. So that is the challenge and the conversations that we have through the Compact with Africa, which is a legacy project or program that came out of the G20 presidency of Germany in 2017. And we are taking that. I'll try to move fast. I know that I like talking, but I'm going to try to move very fast. So our G20 presidency, the first, as the Dean has outlined, but for us, it is not only a moment for South Africa, but it is a moment for the rest of the continent, because under the leadership, under the presence of India in 2023, the African Union became the member of G20. So it is not only for South Africa, because we are part of the G20. That is why it is part of the African continent. And therefore, we move together in ensuring under the theme of solidarity, of equality, and sustainability. And these themes were thought through, and because we know that the playing field is not level. That is why in the conversations and also in the policy conversations, we need to strive for that equality, that each and every voice matters in these conversations. So through solidarity, we're meaning those things that we want to seek a future that is people-centered, and that is development-oriented. That is why, and it must be inclusive. And also through equality, we want to make sure that there's fair treatment. Like I've said, that the playing field is not level. Therefore, we are pursuing these policy positions that ensure that there's equality globally. And in sustainability, we want to make sure that the future is secure, that today's development does not compromise the next generations. So we focused as South Africa as the national focus point, that is, those are the areas that we're focusing on. And we want to promote an Africa-focused global agenda, an Africa-focused global agenda. And we are making every effort to make sure that the continent is playing its part in this growth narrative. So we have done all the things Ambassador Marcia would know, because they were the president presiding over G20 last year, that we want to achieve those things. We had 134 meetings as we're building towards, and we wanted to make sure that there is a spread. There has been meetings that were held throughout the continent, some in Ethiopia, some in Nigeria, to make sure that this is not only South Africa's moment, but the continent feels. And in South Africa, we made sure that there is a spread. That is why we have the social summit, which also we took from Brazil's presidency, that South Africans must feel part of these conversations, that they must also participate. And some of the meetings were exposing the G20 members to the rest of the country, not only in Gauteng, the province where the summit will be held. So I don't want to get into those, but you can see what we want to position this presidents on, because these are the foreign policy pillars, South Africa's foreign policy pillars, that we need to advance, yes, our national interest, which is what is the building, the point of departure of every foreign policy. It is the national interest. And therefore, Africa for us is at the center of our conversations as South Africa's foreign policy. And also the South-South cooperation is very important for us. But we need to acknowledge that the North-South dialogue must always continue, because we need to move together as the globe, as the global community. That is why for us, whilst we're advancing all these positions, we understand that the North-South dialogue must continue, and that is those are the key foreign policies. So what do we mean by the inclusive and resilient growth? Because this came out of observations that the development, the concept of economic growth is not taking everybody on board. In South Africa, there are three challenges that we're faced with, both as born out of our past, the pre-1994 South Africa, that we need to make sure that we're moving together. When I spoke to young students at Yonsei University, I was outlining how South Africa looked like before 1994. And everything that we are doing, even what becomes a distorted rhetoric, that there are people that are facing genocide in South Africa, it is because we are pushing this agenda of making sure that South Africa is inclusive in its growth, because the South African population, such that the Africans make the bulk of the South African population. Then we'll have the Indian South Africans of Indian origin. We have what is contested elsewhere, but we have what we call a colored people. It's contested because it is a combination of people who look like myself and those who look like Ambassador Michelle. And when they have a child, that child is considered colored because They neither look like Ambassador Michelle nor look like me. That is that group. And also the South Africans who are from the Khoisan and from the Cape Malays who contest this concept of being referred to as coloureds. Those are the people who come from Indonesia, Malaysia, who moved into during the discovery that was led by the Dutch East India Company. So we have that, but the smallest percentage of white South Africans, those of Dutch origin and British origin, they control the bulk of South Africa's economy. So though they're less than 10% in terms of demographics, but they are in charge of more than 70% of South Africa's economy. So the transformation of South Africa wants to ensure that there is a redress, there is also inclusive. So this is why we have decided to put that as our focus both for G20 and as part of our conversations. So as we move with South Africa, we ask to acknowledge our challenges, that our economy is not growing at the pace that will make sure that we get the jobs that we want. We move South Africans out of poverty. We create equality, because I think those who know global stats, South Africa is one of the most unequal societies in terms of our Gini coefficient, that we are the most unequal society. Therefore, we're striving for that to make sure that we are moving. Our economy, if you look at what we projected for 2024, 1.1%. And according to our National Development Plan, we need 5% growth to be able to deal with these three challenges that I've outlined: poverty, inequality, and unemployment. So this subdued performance of our economy needs us to focus on policy measures that change that, and we better change that fast. That is what the World Bank is saying. If it's a business as usual scenario, 479 million people will live in extreme poverty by 2030. Therefore, it needs to be business unusual. So if you do what we've been doing, we can't expect different results. We are going to get the same results. So we need to have these policy shifts in order to make sure that the quality of jobs are created and the scenario changes and moves people out of poverty. So we're doing this multi-pronged approach to address these issues, and the private sector is playing a critical role. And in 2020, some of the policy shifts was when the president introduced the President Employment Stimulus. This is taking care of the graduates and the youth unemployment, because for us, bulk of unemployment is from the youth. And the state-owned enterprises are also playing that critical role, and the industrial policy, because it is for that reason that we are saying the minerals that we have must form part of this industrial policy, that beneficiation takes place. It's not only South Africa, but throughout the continent that we are making this call. And we, using our diplomatic relations and partnerships, to make sure that we move fast in this. So we have a broader collective. There is, I hope this slide shows the Agenda 2063. What we call NETLEC is our engagement, business, labor, and government work together to agree on policy positions and how do we change our situation. We have put Agenda 2063 as a blueprint for Africa's development. That is how we are going to get to the agenda to 100 years since the formation of the OAU, which is now the OAU's Organization of African Unity, that was formed on the 25th of March, May 1963. So as we journey to 2063, we want to make sure that Africa looks different. So when we change OAU to AU, the conversation was like, now that the last African state has been liberated, which was Africa, which was South Africa, How do we change the focus of the OAU, hence the development and the coming into existence of the AU, the African Union, in 2002. So we have set that agenda for the development of Africa. This legacy program of Compact with Africa is calling on all the G20 members to support Africa's growth in terms of policy development, in terms of infrastructure development. Because when we look at ourselves as the African continent, we are not doing much business among ourselves. The intra-Africa trade was, the last time I checked, at 14%. You check with Asia, intra-Asia trade. So this Compact with Africa is supporting the framework of development in terms of policies, in terms of infrastructure, and encourage G20 members to focus on the development of the continent in terms of industrial, economic, and all that goes with that. So these are the things that will happen. This Africa, it is in the finance track. I don't want to bore you with that, but we continue with this Africa engagement framework up to 2030. Therefore, we'll be working with all the G20 presidencies, with the US next year, and the other presidencies. So in conclusion, the narrative of having a growth that brings everybody together and ensure that the playing field is leveled. It is the narrative that is critical in the global policy development. I don't want to go to the points that the Dean has made, which are very critical, that we have a change now in terms of the focus, and we need to make sure that a rules-based international order is kept intact. Because if we don't do that, we stand a good chance of having a growth that does not include those who might not be at the same level as the more developed. But if we ensure that we keep the rules-based international order, we make sure that multilateralism is at the center of our global conversations and therefore policy. I'd like to reference the foreign minister when he met the heads of mission, the foreign heads of mission in Seoul. When he was asked, what is your view in terms of the development, in terms of the institution, the global institutions, his response, which I found profound, was that whilst we don't have the best, but we need to work with what we have now, even though we don't have what we aspire for, but what we have now is still something that we can work with. I would like to say that it includes this concept of inclusive and resilient growth, because this growth won't be resilient if we don't take everybody on board and if we don't use the available instruments that can take us forward and sort of level the playing field. So the policy interventions that we are making is to make sure that we grow in that order. And for us, Agenda 2063, the AFCFTA, those are the instruments that we are putting in place as the continent. Going back to that which I said, that Africa, the challenge is on us that we cannot remain the next growth point forever, because if you look at Asia, they prepared themselves. But if we don't prepare, we will remain the next growth point and will be the next forever. So it is a challenge on us, Africa. But through those aspirations that we put through Agenda 2063, is silencing the guns, is doing all those things. You're aware of the wars, the instability in the DRC, in the eastern part, in Sudan, and all over the place. That is why we are saying we need to do something about those and the Africa that we want to see in 2063. And we take pride in co-chairing that G20 compact with Africa alongside Germany. I would like to talk more, but that showed me that my time is up. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, especially given the fact that you were losing your voice. We really, really appreciate your time today. Okay, so next, our second presentation will be delivered by one of our very own, Professor Won-Hyuk Lim. He is the Associate Dean of the Office of Research and International Cooperation at KDI School. Drawing on his extensive experience in international trade and global economic policy, Professor Lim has contributed to major international initiatives, including the G20 Seoul Development Consensus for Shared Growth. And he's here to discuss with us today the future of international trade. So please welcome Professor Lim.
My topic is the future of international trade, and I'd like to present this in three parts. In the first part, I'll talk about how we got here, the history of globalization and global governance on international trade. In the second part, I'll talk about current challenges, including actions taken by the Trump administration. And in the third part, I'll talk about policy implications for the future. Well, in this figure, I'd like to show the two waves of trade and financial globalization. I want you to focus on the blue line, which shows trade to global GDP ratio. Okay. As you can see, in the first wave, starting during the time of the Industrial Revolution and imperialist expansion, trade to GDP ratio rose rapidly. Okay. And then there was a stabilizing period when trade expanded about at the same rate as global GDP from about 1871 to 1913, just before World War I. And then it began to decline. Okay. There was the war, and then the Great Depression. In fact, during the 4-year period from 1929 to 1933, the volume of international trade declined by 2/3 as countries adopted mutually destructive trade restrictions and competitive devaluations. And then countries like Nazi Germany, Japan, and Italy resorted to military adventurism, in part as a way to overcome the economic crisis. That led to World War II. So there was the further decline in trade to GDP ratio, which finished off the first wave of globalization. With the end of World War II, we started the second wave of globalization. And in the first phase of the second wave, trade to GDP ratio began to increase once again. But as you know, the end of World War II was shortly followed by the outbreak of the Cold War. And what we basically had was something like half globalization, because there were two competing blocs, US-led bloc and Soviet Union-led bloc. But then in the second phase of the second wave of globalization, starting in about 1979, just after China launched its reform and opening up policy, we had expansion and transformation of globalization. And in fact, when the US-Soviet Cold War ended in the late 1980s, we had rapid increase in trade to GDP ratio, which is often referred to as hyperglobalization. But as you know, after the global financial crisis of 2008, we now have slowed down in globalization, or even a slight decline in the trade to global GDP ratio. This is often referred to as slowbalization, slowdown in globalization, and that's where we are. You can look at this from global governance perspective as well. As I mentioned, during the Great Depression, great powers adopted mutually destructive trade restrictions and competitive devaluations, which eventually led to World War II. So when the Second World War was about to end, and when victorious major powers began to design new world order after the war, the key notion they had was to prevent the recurrence or reemergence of these competing blocs adopting mutually destructive policies. So in international trade, especially for global governance on international trade, the basic solution they had was a combination of multilateralism based on structural non-discrimination and progressive liberalization. So you had most favored nation and national treatment principles incorporated into multilateralism, and you had a series of trade rounds where you try to achieve a balance of interests among participating countries to further push trade liberalization. And overall, I think we had quite a bit of success, and this new global governance on international trade produced broadly, reciprocally, mutually beneficial results. But not everyone in every country benefited from this. When the WTO was set up and launched in 1995, it was after the Cold War, right? And there was a lot of optimism about further expanding trade. And one thing they really took care about was the creation of a dispute settlement mechanism where countries could peacefully discuss their trade disputes and settle the issue. Right? In fact, if you look at the WTO, it's a very interesting organization in that it has this kind of dispute settlement body, and right there in the middle is an appellate body consisting of 7 judges. Right? And they try to work out and adjudicate trade disputes among member countries. In addition, WTO is much more diverse in leadership, if you think about it. Unlike the IMF, whose managing director has been a European national since its inception, and whose first deputy managing director is an American. And unlike the World Bank, whose president has been an American national since its establishment, WTO has had director generals of, and GATT before that, of various nationalities. In fact, currently, a Nigerian is a director general of the WTO. So in a way, WTO reflected changing realities, geopolitical and economic realities on the ground, and not so dominated by the situation immediately after World War II. Okay. Now, countries try to push the trade agenda, as you know, as incorporated in the Doha Development Round in 2001. As you recall, Doha Development Round was launched 2 months after 9/11. Okay, so there was an explicit recognition of the challenges of development and nexus between development and security. But the reality was that many advanced industrial countries refused to address problems like agricultural subsidies, and instead wanted to push other agenda like competition, investment, government procurement, and trade facilitation. So there was a gridlock, and furthermore, with China's accession to the WTO in 2001 and its rapid growth and development, principles like special and differential treatment became increasingly difficult to accept for many advanced industrial countries. Right? So at Nairobi in 2015, the United States basically declared its intention to terminate Doha round. Okay? And that's where we are on the global governance front and international trade. Now, more currently, we are dealing with issues like economic security, its impact on global value chains, as well as new tariffs imposed by the United States. Traditionally, when we talk about economic security, we deal with three tasks. First is to reduce vulnerability to economic manipulation by other states. Some state, some country cutting off, for example, energy supplies to you, right? So how are you going to reduce vulnerability to economic manipulation? The second key task for economic security is safeguarding critical technologies, personnel, and materials for the economy and military. And the third task is to reduce vulnerability to economic shocks caused by non-state actors, as well as financial markets and other markets. Right? Now, with increasing competition between the United States and China, economic security has become increasingly important. Right? And it has had a big impact on global value chain agenda as well. So instead of just looking at economic efficiency, countries now begin to pay more attention to geopolitical matters. So things like reshoring, nearshoring, and friendshoring became important topics for discussion. Of course, as I put in scary quotes, it's important to figure out who your friends are, right? I mean, when you say friendshoring, what do you exactly mean? Because in international relations, you don't have eternal friends, nor do you have eternal enemies, right? So even if you think you are friendshoring now, if a country, your supposedly friendly country, turns around and takes some measures that have a big impact on your economy, can you call that or consider that country still a friend? That becomes an important issue. And things like decoupling, de-risking, and diversification have become important topics as well. If you look at the Trump administration's tariffs on Canada and Mexico, I mean, since many decades ago, especially since the establishment of NAFTA, okay, the basic underlying assumption for corporate investment in North America was that United States, Canada, and Mexico are in it in this together, and they will be friends, right? And you wouldn't need to worry about geopolitical considerations. But that meant Canada and Mexico have trade dependence on the United States up to about 80%, which makes them very vulnerable as well. So you have to think about these issues in a much more expansive way. And as we saw with COVID, okay, and Russia's invasion of Ukraine, you need to think about various shocks that could take place in this age. And this has been exacerbated by a recent run of changes in U.S. trade policy. Okay. Typically, we argue, scholars like Doug Irwin argue, that there are three objectives for tariffs, three R's: revenue, restriction, and reciprocity. Okay. The basic idea is that you could impose tariffs to generate revenue for government, or you could restrict imports to provide breathing room for your domestic producers and possibly promote some industries. And thirdly, you could use tariffs as a bargaining tool to have reciprocity and the negotiated agreement. So these are the three objectives for tariffs. Traditionally, United States resorted to tariffs to generate revenue and restrict imports for the first 100 years or so. Okay? But then in 1934, United States passed the Reciprocal Trade Agreements Act and began to use tariffs as a bargaining tool, negotiating leverage to win concessions from trading partners. And that meant progressive lowering of tariffs over time. But against this trend, Trump administration, Biden administration, and the second Trump administration using tariffs to pursue all three objectives, it seems. So, for example, if you look at the history of tariffs, if you focus on the average effective tariff rate since 1790 onward, as I mentioned, in the early days of the Republic, the average tariff rate was very high. Okay? But then, starting in about 1934, with Reciprocal Trade Agreements Act, United States began to use tariffs as a bargaining tool and progressively drove down the effective tariff rates. So it was very low by 2020, but as the yellow line and the green line shows, tariff rate has been raised dramatically under the second Trump administration. Also, if you look at the tariff revenue as a share of total federal receipts, as I explained, in the early days of the Republic, United States depended heavily on tariff revenue. You should remember that United States didn't have federal income tax until 1913. So tariff revenue accounted for most of the federal government's receipts, revenue. But since 1934, tariff rates had been reduced because United States began using tariffs as bargaining tool to progressively lower tariffs. So by fiscal year 2023, tariff revenue accounted for only 2% of US federal receipts, okay? So only a very small fraction. Now, if you make tax cuts permanent and try to make up for the shortfall by using tariff revenue, is that a realistic policy? Some people have done some simulation. People at Peterson Institute, a couple of scholars, did a simulation to figure out the tariff rate at which tariff revenue for the United States is maximized. Turns out it's at about 50% tariff rate, and the maximum customs revenue, tariff revenue, is about $780 billion. So it's not a small amount of money. But then if you have 50% tariff, that's going to have a big impact on the economy. And even the second Trump administration has not done that. It's about a 20% effective rate now. Okay. So it's important to understand the increasing linkage between United States fiscal policy and trade policy. This graph shows US national debt to GDP ratio, not including contingent liabilities like Social Security. So as you can see, historically, the peak for debt to GDP ratio was reached in 1946 at 106%. Since the end of the Second World War, this debt to GDP ratio came down as United States recorded robust economic growth and had some inflation. Okay? But starting once again in the early 2000s, with George W. Bush's tax cuts, as well as rapid increase in discretionary spending, like the war in Iraq, and increasing social security spending, debt to GDP ratio has once again begun to rise rapidly. And now it's near the historical peak, even though there's no war. Okay? And if you include contingent liabilities like social security payments, US debt to GDP ratio is 120% of GDP. Okay? You can look at the annual budget deficit as percent of GDP for the United States. And here you see that after the tax cuts and so on, US federal revenue in orange line, in orange color, is about 15% of GDP. Okay? But federal spending is expected to rise. And in this graph, the dark blue color is net interest payment. So in the most recent fiscal year, US net interest payment exceeded $1 trillion and is projected to increase further. And given this fiscal policy situation and not willing to make concessions on that issue, United States is using tariff policy. So, you've seen this table, and let me, since negotiations are still going on, let me skip this, and let's get to the last part of the talk. What are some future policy challenges? Okay. Well, there's an increasing linkage between US fiscal policy and trade and industrial policy. Repeated tax cuts, spending increases, and stimulus measures have increased the debt to GDP ratio, and there's a little political appetite to raise taxes and cut spending. So the US administration has turned to tariffs and unconventional measures to raise net revenue. There's a talk about so-called the Mar-a-Lago Accord, where US Treasury debt would be converted to very long-term bonds without having to pay interest, zero coupon bonds of about 100 years in duration. These are some of the things that are actually discussed these days. So what is the right thing to do for the United States, ideally? If you look at the root of the problem, you need to tax fairly and rein in spending. You invest in education and provide social safety nets so that people can adjust to changing technology and trade. And ideally, US should lead the reform of the WTO system, address things like subsidies and state-owned enterprises, revive dispute settlement mechanism by agreeing to nominate and confirm new judges on the appellate body, and change special and differential treatment with graduation criteria. So that's sort of the right thing to do. What is the Trump administration likely to do is a different question altogether. And I think it's likely to put pressure on other countries using forward deployed troops or asymmetrical trade dependence as leverage, and make a compromise when the going gets tough. I mean, to his credit, Trump has been flexible enough to make adjustments when there's a financial market turbulence, rare earths problems, soybeans, and so on. So there has been some adjustment. But at the same time, Trump administration has engaged in politics, identity, and polarization, and has been taking credit for inbound FDI and manufacturing jobs. So given the Trump administration is likely to continue to do that, what should other countries do? What should other countries do? Basically, I think unless you have enough bargaining leverage vis-a-vis the United States, I think it's better to refrain from retaliation, even though it'll be important to resist unreasonable demands. Okay? But at the same time, for the mid to long term, you diversify trade, promote regional and interregional cooperation, and wait for the United States to come back. So for example, in interregional cooperation, European Union is pushing for the agreement with Mercosur in South America. Possibly, we could try to persuade India to join RCEP, right? Given its problems with the Trump administration and so on. And so you try to diversify risks. For the governance, global governance and trade itself, I think prospects for trade reform are not very bright. I emphasize that no country is likely to withdraw from the WTO altogether, even the United States, because that means you have to renegotiate all these trade agreements with other trading partners, and that'll take a lot of time, and that'll be so time-consuming. So what's likely to happen is that the WTO system is going to muddle along with some dysfunctional, dispute settlement system and so on. Okay? And there will be some experiments at plurilateral or sectoral level. Okay? And important thing we should try and push for is expandable cooperation, open regionalism a la APEC recently concluded. So you think about an intersection of interests and a compatibility of systems among different countries beyond ideological positioning, and try to form a coalition and build a system of rules that can be accepted by everyone, more through the force of logic than the logic of force. And finally, for the reconfiguration of global value chains, I think it's likely to result in China plus a few strategy, because for multinational corporations, economic fundamentals matter as much as geopolitical considerations. And in practice, because of not only supply-side factors, but also demand-side factors, the large market of China, it's extremely difficult to decouple from China. And instead, it's likely to result in China plus a few strategy. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Lim. We just need 3 minutes to set up the stage, so we're going to forego your little break. Sorry about that, but that just means an earlier lunch, okay? So just bear with us while we set up our stage. Okay, welcome back, everyone. As we continue, I'm pleased to introduce our moderator, Professor Jun Oh. Before joining academia, Professor Oh had the distinguished diplomatic career, contributing greatly to Korea's foreign affairs and international cooperation, and serving as Korea's ambassador and permanent representative to the United Nations. For the discussion session, we are also joined this morning by 2 distinguished speakers, along with our panelists. Dr. Jung-Gyu Lee is the director of the Office of Global and North Korean Economic Studies at KDI, and Mr. Diego Dominguez, the Economic and Cooperation Counselor at the Embassy of Mexico. And with that, I'd like to give the floor to Professor Oh. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Yoon. Good morning, everyone. As we introduced, my name is Jun Oh, and I'm a visiting professor at KDI School currently, but I used to be a Korean diplomat. Like many of you in the room, I used to be in the foreign service. Sometimes my students ask me a question like, Professor, which is more difficult between teaching and diplomacy? And I think about it, and I usually try to answer like, it depends on whom you are dealing with. If you are teaching and your students are like those at KDI school, intelligent and enthusiastic, teaching is a fun. But whereas, if you are a diplomat and other diplomats are uncooperative, and you are holding a party and they are not coming, sometimes even they are boycotting your party, then life is tough. And vice versa, actually. If you have diplomatic colleagues like those in this room who are professional and decent, diplomacy is a lot of fun. But if your students are unattentive and they are lazy and sloppy, then teaching is quite tough. So it really depends on whom you are dealing with. Anyway, it looks like the setting is KDI versus diplomatic corps, but I think it's cooperative setting. Yeah. Anyway, well, our forum's topic, as you have noticed, is global governance and diplomacy. And actually, global governance, because I spent a lot of time when I was a diplomat, spent a lot of time in New York, dealing with United Nations issues. So global governance is some very important issue I keep thinking about. And as you have noticed, we are not getting effective enough or strong enough global governance these days, not least because the United Nations looks like it's failing. UN Security Council is often stuck. 10 years ago, I was a Security Council ambassador. Now it's much worse, I think, because of veto power and everything. And climate change, SDGs, we are not on track at all. So global governance is failing. I try to think about why. And the way I see it, this is purely my personal opinion, and because I'm out of service, I can speak my mind, unlike you. And in my opinion, according to Freedom House, almost 70% of all the countries in the world are now either democratic or partially democratic, which is great advancement, actually. 40 years ago, only 40% of countries in the world were democratic or partially democratic. But with the spread of democracy, people are benefiting by enjoying more human rights and freedom. But at the same time, I think policies by states are more easily affected by politics, politicians, because you have to elect your leaders through, politics in any country. And if for a political leader, if election is next year and climate disaster is 30 years later, which is more important for you? Naturally, including in South Korea, all our policies, whether it's foreign policy, economic policy, financial policy, whatever policies are more and more affected by politicians, which is also called populism, pandering to changing public moods more. I say public mood, not public opinion, because opinion is something warranting serious consideration, where mood keeps changing. So that's my initial statement, because I have to also make a statement. And I don't have to do it anymore, because I have 4 distinguished panelists, speakers, and we already heard presentations by Ambassador Mukuku and also Professor Won-hyuk Lim. So we have 2 distinguished discussants, Dr. Jong-kyu Lee, who is Director for Global and North Korean Economic Studies at KDI, and Mr. Diego Dominguez, Economic and Cooperation Counselor at the Embassy of Mexico here in Seoul. So I will give the floor to Dr. Lee first.
Okay. Hello. Okay, I'm Jong-kyu Lee at KDI, and it's an honor to be invited to this meaningful event. And today's presentation have been both insightful and thought-provoking, and giving me much to learn and reflect upon. In my comments today, I'd like to focus on this year's G20 Finance Track Working Group agendas and share some thoughts on the way forward. And before turning to the working groups, I believe Ambassador Kuku has already provided an excellent overview of the G20 priorities this year. Disaster resilience and debt sustainability and finance for just energy transition and critical minerals for development. And these are the issues that must be addressed not only within the G20, but also at the global level. And I believe South Africa, as the host country, has done an excellent job in addressing them. Now, I'd like to briefly touch on each of the working group agendas and share Korea's perspective. And first, regarding macroeconomic cooperation, the Framework Working Group, Professor Lim Won-hyuk has already provided an excellent presentation earlier about global macroeconomic situation. As for FWG discussion, issues are discussed based on very principle level rather than critical of specific national policies such as US tariff measures. And member states also share the view that while climate policies may cause short-term economic shocks, they are indispensable in the longer term. In addition, the positive impact of AI on productivity growth and labor market complementarity were highlighted. And as for Korea, we introduced our supplementary budget as a measure to counter domestic demand weakness and also emphasize policies to mitigate labor market inequality and social disparities arising from the spread of AI technologies. Next, on the international financial architecture, member countries broadly supported discussion on monitoring MDBs and strengthening MDBs through private capital and addressing debt vulnerabilities. And there was also strong emphasis on the need to analyze investment behaviors of NBFIs and to enhance functions of the IMF. While there was general agreement on the importance of addressing growth constraint in Africa, some members expressed concerns about the overly extensive work plan. So, as for Korea, we expressed our support for the follow-up work of the IFA working group, particularly on MDB reform, and support for debt vulnerable countries and analysis of NBFI investment behavior. On infrastructure working group, moving on to the infrastructure working group, the discussion focused on expanding the participation and role of MDBs in infrastructure investment and building a stronger infrastructure pipeline and promoting blended finance and enhancing cross-border connectivity. And across these areas, there was a strong emphasis on data transparency and accessibility. However, some members expressed caution about revising regulatory barriers related to blended finance, suggesting a more measured approach. As for Korea, we share the view on the important role of private capital in infrastructure investment and the need to make better use of data, and we expressed our commitment to actively participating in related discussion going forward. The last one is the Sustainable Finance Working Group. Discussions focused on enhancing co-financing among MDBs, NDBs, the VCEF, and the private sector, and closing the climate insurance protection gap, and improving data accessibility and ensuring a just transition through a paced approach. However, some divergence remained regarding the data governance of the carbon credit data model. And Korea expressed its support for strengthening the global sustainable finance framework and for the work streams on adoption finance and just transition. And we also shared our concerns over the governance aspect of the carbon credit data. And emphasized restoring trust is essential for unlocking the potential of the global carbon market. So next, finally, I'd like to conclude my remarks by briefly looking at the recent trends in G20 agendas. From 2022 to 2025, as Indonesia, India, Brazil, and South Africa have successively served as G20 presidency, the group has increasingly focused on issues that are particularly important from the perspective of developing countries, such as food and energy insecurity, the distributive aspect of climate transition policies, inequality, and productivity enhancement in the age of AI. However, with the US assuming the presidency next year, we may begin to see some shift in focus toward issues that are considered priorities, mainly from the standpoint of the US or some developed countries. It remains to be seen what kind of agenda will emerge in the SFWG under the US presidency. The absence of both the US and Argentina from the recent G20 summit also signals that the G20 could look quite different from what we have seen in recent years. So in that sense, the coming period may serve as an important test of how the current multilateral cooperation framework is evolving and what kind of paradigm shift can be seen. And that was my comment. And as South Africa holds the G20 presidency this year, I would like to hear Ambassador Mkuku's thoughts on how South Africa plans to navigate this challenging environment next year. So I think the role of South Africa is very important because they can bridge between the North and South. So that was my comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Lee. We will hear Ambassador Mukuk later. And of course, we all know that G20 is also an important part of global governance. You know, these informal processes like G20, G7, APEC, all of them are informal. They are not based on international treaties like United Nations, but they are also, they have their role as a part of global governance. We all know that. And we move on to Councillor Diego Dominguez of the Mexican Embassy. Please, Councillor.
Thank you so much. 안녕하십니까? Thank you so much for the invitation to KDI, and thank you so much, Ambassador Mkuku. It's a great honor to share the table with you, especially against Korea in this match. I would like to also commend South Africa for its very important, distinguished presidency. As the ambassador said, the G20 is finally in Africa after so many years, and the G20 is finally putting Africa at the center of its agenda something that was long overdue. And while Germany did a great effort with the Compact with Africa, first joining the African Union joining the G20, and now the South African presidency really reminds us that the G20 is not a forum of developed economies, but a forum of global governance between developed and emerging economies. And I would like to just share very briefly that Mexico supports the South African priorities in combating poverty, inequality, gender equality, of course, sustainable transition, food security, development financing. These are priorities that we have sought and we have fostered many, many years. Before I came to Korea 3 years ago, I was director for G20 at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Mexico, and I was a negotiator at the G20 under the Argentinian, Japanese, Saudi, and Italian presidencies. So many, many hours of not sleeping and having many, many coffees at night. So I know how difficult, how challenging it is to hold the G20 presidency and how challenging discussions can be. I want to get a bit controversial here and try to get the discussion going as we move forward with the leaders summit in, I think, a week from now. What do we expect from the summit? What we expect from the summit is leaders getting together, is leaders holding plenary meetings, bilateral meetings, and hopefully reaching a consensus-based statement. How is that statement going to look this year? And I think that is a big question that Ambassador Mkuku could answer, if she has the answer. Leader statements are usually very, very extensive, technical, full of commas documents that are negotiated over hours and hours and days, which in the end, what they try to show is that there is consensus among G20 members on the most pressing issues. So there was an inside joke among negotiators that the main purpose of the leader's statement was to serve as the basis for the next year's leader statement. So that in any case, if there was controversy, they could say, oh, okay, let's go back to last year's agreed upon language. So it was for internal audiences. It was the G20 speaking to the G20. And if you have time to read a G20 leader statement, and for those who are not English speakers, try to translate that into your own language. It's impossible to do it. I tried to do it. It was one of my jobs on the way back from Rome, from Buenos Aires, from Osaka, to be on the flight translating the document into Spanish for the press. It's impossible. I mean, there are one-page long paragraphs saying that while we support the energy transition based on national interest, but differentiated, comma, we believe that further action is necessary. Who's going to read that, honestly? Who is going to read that? We are going to read that as diplomats, and we as negotiators are going to read that to see, oh, okay, so next year, in case my proposal does not go forward, then I have this agreed upon language, and then I can go back to that. Or I have the UN resolutions or whatever. So I think we need to ask ourselves, and what our moderator said at the beginning, we need to rethink the G20 as a whole. So if you remember, the G20 was created as an emergency crisis group. It was created as a situation room to address financial crisis. First in 1999 with the Asian crisis, and then 2008, 2009 with the global financial crisis. So I think the first question we must ask ourselves is, are we going through a crisis right now? Maybe not a financial crisis, as in 2008, 2009, but maybe a trade crisis, there is a crisis of international trade, with tariffs, but also with supply chains, but also with protectionism, but also with overnight changes in policies, with supply of critical minerals. There is a crisis. And more broadly, and I want to be very, very specific here. This is my personal opinion, not as a diplomat. This is not the government's view. It's my personal opinion. A global governance crisis. Who is ruling the world right now? Who sets the rules? Who sets the agendas? And I think the G20 right now needs to be rethought. And there is a proposal by the United States to take the G20 back to its origins. And I think the Mexican government's position is that any such decision needs to be consensus-based. And I think we should all discuss that. But in my personal view, I think there is some merit, and I think there is something that we need to discuss. We have over 15 working groups just in the Sherpa track, plus the ones that were mentioned on the financial track. There are so many meetings. And this year, unfortunately, some of these working groups did not reach a ministerial statement. There was only a chair summary. So this is not looking good for the Johannesburg summit. So I think some ideas that we could discuss and that the G20 could discuss are, first of all, do we need so many working groups? Do we need a climate working group, energy working group, environment working group, and disaster risk reduction working group? Or can we merge some of them? Because most of them are discussing the same issues from different perspectives. But we need to remind ourselves that the G20's main goal was to serve as an effective multilateral group in the face of more institutionalized organizations. So is it effective to have 15 working groups, plus the engagement groups, plus the task forces? Or can we try to, it is natural for organizations to evolve, but maybe we can try to make it like a bit short and sweet and try to find convergences in working groups to make discussions more efficient. And the second one I wanted to touch upon is we must uphold at the Johannesburg summit the most basic achievements we have reached in the past years. And I'm talking, for instance, about gender equality. It is absolutely astonishing that we are still negotiating and debating whether gender equality should or should not be part of the leader's statement. And whether it is gender equality or empowerment of women or the empowerment of everyone or the empowerment of all populations. Come on, there is a gender inequality. There are gender pay gaps. There is a disproportionate burden on women of caregiving tasks, unpaid care work. And we have the Women's Empowerment Working Group. I don't know if the Empower Engagement Group is still operating. I hope it is. We have Women 20, W20. And we are still debating whether, and I bet you that during the Johannesburg summit, at 3:30 in the morning, there are going to be debates about whether gender equality term will or will not be there. So we must uphold the most basic, we cannot take steps back. And I think these are fights worth fighting. Another one is the Compact for Africa. And I think the Compact for Africa should remain there. And I think South Africa is doing a great job with that. And the last one, and I have only 30 seconds to say this, is do we want a consensus-based statement or not? Is consensus really necessary? Because G20 is a consensus-based mechanism. But there is no consensus within the G20. And I think there is no, like, we're not kidding anyone when we say that the G20 speaks with one voice. The G20 is not speaking with one voice. So must we have a consensus-based statement just for the sake of consensus? Or should we reflect the divergences and the opposing views that the world actually has in that document? We have done it before, and I would suggest you to go back to the first Trump administration, when there was one paragraph on climate change from 19 countries and one paragraph saying the United States recognizes, and that was a consensus-based saying we agree to disagree. Let's agree to disagree. And if there is no consensus on gender equality, for instance, let's say these members of the G20 support gender equality, these members of the G20 do not support gender equality, or to add the paragraph that they want to add. But I think the G20, it is important to have consensus, but not for the sake of consensus. And it is important that the G20 shows the world that there are a diversity of opinions and views in the international system. And as we move forward to the United States, we're going back to another round of presidencies. We should rethink the G20. Membership, structure, consensus-based mechanism, topics that must be addressed, and that should be a reflection of the world we are living in. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Councillor Dominguez. Before going back to the two speakers, I'd like to open the floor so that we can have some comments and questions from the floor. Don't forget that Professor Lim gave us an excellent data-based presentation on the future of international trade. As we all know, the international trade system is in transition, if not in crisis. So that's a very important issue for all of us as well. The floor is open. Please. Can someone fetch the microphone?
Thank you, and good morning, everyone. My name is Mohammed Khalil. I'm ambassador and currently working with the Green Climate Fund as the lead on strategic government relations. I've been involved for a long time in multilateral negotiations related to sustainable development, climate change, and so on in New York and other places. And I totally agree with the last intervention. Thank you, Councillor Dominguez. You did well in making it controversial and provoking. And I agree, as we are speaking about global governance, we definitely have a global governance crisis. And let's not fool ourselves. I think that the current global and world institutions are being jeopardized, are being challenged. And we are seeing for the first time major and radical changes to the post-Second World War international order. Part of it is the political dynamics and geopolitical dynamics, but I think that part of it as well is that the institutions themselves were not ready for this moment. And using the same example of G20, I think that the issue of the reform of international institutions is important, and it's really needed. And it's true. I mean, when you mentioned the example, myself being in New York negotiating lots of texts, it's true. I mean, at the end of the day, you can easily see that this work can be considerably streamlined, and we can save lots of resources and time if things are done in a different way. I mean, I'm taking, for example, the example of the 4 working groups that are basically discussing the same thing. So I think the question is what kind of international order is emerging, or even not emerging. I think it's a fair question. Are we going into a phase of no order again, like pre World War II, or we are still maintaining the order as it is, but for sure it needs major reform if this order is going to continue. The idea of multilateralism, it's being challenged and jeopardized as well, and myself observing many recent meetings, international meetings and negotiations, I feel like meeting in itself and having an outcome became an end, regardless of the content or the quality of the outcome, because there is this sense that multilateralism is a challenge, it threatens, so we need to confirm every time we meet, no, it's alive. Yeah, but what is the outcome at the end? What is leading to? That's an important issue as well. Maybe I will end with a note of hope. I think one major important development took place during the ONGA last September, the high-level week of the UN General Assembly, when for the first time the biennial summit for global inclusive and sustainable growth convened in New York. This was one of the outcomes and recommendations of the Summit of the Future. And it is for the first time that we are seeing all relevant stakeholders are on the table at leaders level. There was all the heads of the institutions, the UNSG, WTO, all major groups, G20, G77 and China, LDCs, SIDS, the president of the UNFCCC COPs that were there. And I think it's for the first time that we have a gathering at this level and this inclusive to discuss global economic governance and addressing systemic issues, which I think it's a major thing that is needed. Hopefully it won't be just another meeting, and it will lead to really concrete outcomes at the end. Thank you.
Thank you. Your remarks remind me of a discussion we had in the United Nations 10 years ago when I was president of UN ECOSOC. We had the debate on the reform of UN's development system, and one ambassador said, we cannot discuss reform of the system because we don't have a system. Anyone else want to make comments? Oh, back there. Back there, and the lady here after that, yeah.
Thank you for your wonderful presentation. I'm Veronica from KDI. My question is to Ambassador Kuku. South Africa is the first African country to preside over and host the G20 summit. So what has been the biggest challenges in ensuring Africans' priority are meaningfully reflected in the G20 agenda, and what practical measure can be taken to ensure these priorities translate into concrete policy actions?
Thank you. Excellent question from a KDI student. You know, you remember I told you that KDI school is very good school because full of good students. Please, microphone here.
Thank you so much. My name is Michelle Winthrop. I'm the Ambassador of Ireland, and I need to say that we are very grateful that South Africa invited us to be the guest member for this round of G20. It's been a fabulous experience for us. I was very struck, Cindy, about what you said about engaging with ordinary South Africans about the G20 process. And I'm also very struck by your remarks earlier on about the rise of populism. Is there, anyone who wants to answer this question, is there scope to use the G20 as a means to inspire people about multilateral or minilateral cooperation. Is there more that could be done to reach out to ordinary citizens in whichever host country to make it a more inclusive process, and therefore to try to push back a little bit on toxic narratives that are out there? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any other? Yeah, just one last question. Yeah, from.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Elena Dimas. I'm also a student from KDIS, and my question is for the Councillor Dominguez. I was really touched about your experience as negotiator in the G20, and I guess it's really hard, as you say. So for those of us who are students and maybe we hope to be negotiators in the futures, which advice would you give us to try to reach consensus between so many parties with different opinions that can maybe improve the challenges that the G20 is facing now? Thank you.
Thank you. I think all the comments and questions are narrowed down on G20 and the role of South Africa, and also the current situation of international trade system, if there is a system, I mean. Anyway, well, regarding the Irish ambassador's comments, you know, even the forums like this and all the G20 related activities, they provide, I think, an excellent platform to reach out to people. You know, people don't know much about climate change, don't know much about, you know, global governance, don't know much about international trade, unless they affect their daily life. But as we hold these meetings and forums and platforms, we give them opportunities to think about it, which, in my opinion, is very important. Well, moderator is not supposed to speak too long, so I am going to give. I'm going to invite Ambassador Mukuku and Professor Lim for their final comments, considering all those questions given to you. And also, if you have anything else to add, please do so. Ambassador, you go first.
Thank you very much, Prof. I forgot when I gave the presentation earlier to really express our appreciation to the G20 members for the support that they have provided to South Africa. And I don't want to get to your issues, Mr. Diego. You are a G20 expert, I'm not. But I'm just talking about South Africa's presidency of the G20. I can't go to 2026, Prof. I can't go to 2026 and predict how we are going to navigate the US presidency of the G20. I really cannot, because I cannot predict what will be happening. But I understand that the G20 is made up of the 21 members, the 19 member states, and the 2 EU and African Union. So there isn't any one country that can take decisions on how the G20 can be run. That's my belief in the global rules-based system. But I think we as South Africans are quite a resilient people, and we respect the rules of the game, and we play by the rules of the game. So, in terms of the reform, Mr. Dominguez, of the G20, I think it's a conversation I would expect the G20 shepherds, both the finance and the shepherd tracks that they were seized with. And if there could be a proposition that the G20 must revert to the original plan, which was the finance track without the Shepherd track. It was the 2008 US presidents of the G20 that introduced the summit level engagements of the G20 and everything that came with being raised to a summit level. It has always been a group of finance ministers, therefore the finance track was the core business. But if there needs to be changes, it cannot be a group of 21 members and then one decides to change the rules. It has to go back to that consensus. And that's why I'm saying a rules-based multilateral system is very important, even if the rules are imperfect. But we need to use the available rules at a point in time. And responding to the Africa engagement, as I have outlined in my presentation, that we understood, and even our president during our own State of the Nation address was clear that Africa is central in our presidency of the G20. And even the ministers' meeting in New York, that was agreed that this Africa engagement framework, it will be continued, and South Africa will be working with the subsequent presidencies to make sure that Africa features and continues to. And Germany is co-chairing with whoever is presiding over G20 on the compact with Africa. Those are the legacy programs of the G20. So during the German presidency and even South Africa's presidency, I think that we are ready, yes, South Africa. In fact, I know for a fact that we are ready, and we are going to have the G20 summit on the 22nd and 23rd. And the outcomes are what the Shepherds will start working on as from today, I think, or from the 16th, that is from Sunday. The Shepherds are meeting in Johannesburg to finalize everything. By the time the leaders arrive and agree upon all those decisions, they would have finalized everything. But I want to, for us, Michelle, it was a conscious decision that we take South Africans along in this, so that their issues feature in the global policy frameworks. So we have decided consciously that civil society will actively participate so that their issues feature in the outcome of our presidents of the G20. Hence, the summit, the social summit on the 20th in Johannesburg on the 20th of November, preceding the summit on the 22nd. So it was a conscious decision that they may feel that they are part, and therefore, because these issues cannot be left at the level of national governments and the leaders. They need to get the voice of civil society, and they feel that they are part of that. Let me leave it at that. Thank you very much, Prof.
Thank you. Well, an ambassador represents a state, so she's not in the business of making predictions on what's going to happen with G20 in 2026, but a professor is. So I expect Dr. Lim will probably enlighten us on that issue. Dr. Lim?
Let me first respond to what Councillor Dominguez said. I think it's important to remember there are two narratives about the G20. First is to look at the G20 as a crisis response committee. So, Asian financial crisis, and then global financial crisis that led to the establishment of the G20 at the ministerial and then the leadership level, okay? If you follow that narrative, then if crisis goes away, there's a natural question as to why the G20 is still there, right? But the other narrative on the G20 is to look at it as a minilateral group that reflects changing geopolitical and economic realities on the ground. So, as you know, permanent members of the UN Security Council, P5, basically represent victorious major powers of World War II, but things have changed greatly since then. G7, Group of Seven, used to account for more than 70% of global GDP, but now it's much less. And the reality back in 2008, when G20 started at leadership level, was that neither P5 or G7 was able to take care of the problem at the time, as well as increasing global problems that require collective action. So I think it's important to remember that G20 is more of the minilateral group that reflects changing realities on the ground, and that should be its identity going forward as well. I agree with the need to streamline working groups and so on, but in my view, that's actually a relatively minor concern compared with the identity of the G20. As for leader statement, I agree with you that it's important to have a leader's joint statement out rather than just chairman's or presidency's statement summarizing discussions. So to that extent, it's essential that we try to have some appearance of consensus, but you don't have to demand consensus on everything, I agree. Because if you do that, at the end of the day, it's going to just result in a statement that you cannot really translate, as you said. I think a joint statement or leader statement should follow the model of something like UN Charter with a preamble and very clear statements about what are going to happen. If that's impossible, we can try and follow the Bali 22 G20 summit when Indonesian presidency did a great job basically reporting different views on Russia's invasion of Ukraine, but actually held the G20 together. I think that should be more of an operational model going forward. Lastly, for 2026, I think the United States is very much interested in holding the summit. I mean, President Trump, made it known that he would like to hold the summit at Mar-a-Lago. Okay, and one worry I actually have is that this could degenerate into a fairly political event where MAGA or MAGA-friendly parties in the United States as well as in other G20 countries may be overly represented. That's my concern. But I think there are other parties to the G20, right? And we should focus on collective action problems that demand action to make the world a better place going forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Lim. If Dr. Lee or Councillor Dominguez has any final thoughts, you want to say something? Yeah, please.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I just want to briefly address the question from a KDI student. You are right, Professor. KDI students are very smart and they ask very, very good questions. I don't have the answer to that, unfortunately. Any advice to reach consensus in order to improve the challenges we face? I think it depends on each topic. I think sometimes it's very simple to reach a consensus changing one word. And for any of you who has been at a UN model or something, when we say, okay, instead of we commit to or we endorse, we share the view, we change some sort of word, then you can reach consensus. But there are some issues like gender equality, climate change, women's empowerment, energy transition. There was, when I was, I think it was the Argentinian or the Japanese presidency, there was a 2-hour discussion on the difference between energy transition and energy transitionless. More than one transition. So one single consonant led us to 2 hours of discussion or more. If we talk about women's empowerment or the empowerment of people, that's something completely different, apparently. So I think consensus is hard to achieve. I think consensus, as you said, is important to achieve. I think what the Indonesian presidency did was a good strategy. Perhaps that's something that we will see in South Africa. We don't know. But I think the advice that I would give you is to not stop negotiating. And that's something that the Mexican government also pursues. Do not get out of the table. Do not walk out of the room. And yes, we spent all night, like we pulled all-nighters working on the Leaders' Declaration. On some summits, the summit had ended, and we were still negotiating. So I think the most important advice is do not walk out of the room until you find something. And do not, also one other thing, do not waste your time on coffee breaks, because coffee breaks are the most important consensus-making spaces. When you are at the table, yeah, when you talk, but when you are outside, that's where the agreements are made. So find your partners. There are groups within the G20, there's the G7, there's MICTA, there's BRICS, there's the African Union right now, there's the European Union. Find your friends, find your allies, try to build some consensus within the group, the mini group, and then try to bring it to the table, but do not walk out of the room until you are satisfied with that. Thank you so much.
Well, with that, ladies and gentlemen, let's give them a big hand. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And also, we'd like to give our wonderful moderators, speakers, and panelists another round of applause as well. Thank you so much for your time. So before we conclude, I just wanted to make a quick announcement. Those of you who are looking for the presentation materials from today, they are available at the QR code that's on your name tags and also on the handout that was left at your place. So we'd like to once again, on behalf of KDI School of Public Policy and Management, thank you all for joining us here today. It was a pleasure to have you for our annual Global Governance and Diplomacy Forum. All we have left for you today is food. So I hope you will stay with us and enjoy today's lunch. Thank you once again.